quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, yesterday the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. Mayorkas, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's the first time he has been before the Judiciary Committee for an oversight hearing. Of course, our minds were all on the crisis that is currently underway and has been since the beginning of this year at the border, when our colleague Senator Lindsey Graham asked him how he would rate his own performance so far. He gave a bizarre answer. He said, "I'd give myself an A for effort." Well, that's the type of rating you'd give yourself if you offered to cook dinner and completely bungled the recipe, or if you ordered a really thoughtful Christmas gift for your spouse, but it didn't arrive on time. Give yourself an A for effort. But when you're talking about the person who's responsible for some of our nation's most critical responsibilities, for which there are life and death consequences, an A for effort is hardly acceptable. And in this case, it's an overly generous assessment. Over the last year, Customs and Border Protection has encountered more than 1.7 million migrants along the southern border, the highest on record. In 1 month alone, more than 213,000 migrants crossed the border, including 19,000 unaccompanied children. The Secretary may think he is worthy of an A for effort, but the numbers certainly do not reflect that. And the American people are clearly concerned about the way things are going. A recent poll found that more than 80% of voters think illegal immigration is a serious issue. Nearly 2/3 believe that the president's executive orders actually encourage more illegal immigration. And as a result, only 35% of voters approve of the president's handling of the border. Leaders in the administration have tried to play the blame game, saying, well, they inherited policies from the previous administration that led to the crisis. That seems to be a part of the playbook. Let's blame Trump. Let's blame the previous administration and absolve ourselves of any responsibility. But they simply failed to provide an explanation for why those policies led to 460,000 less encounters in fiscal year 2020, but more than 1.7 million in 2021. There's no question at all that this crisis is a direct result of the Biden administration's words and deeds. Back in February, just a few weeks after President Biden took his oath of office, migrants interviewed in their trek from their home across our border said as much. One woman who crossed the Rio Grande River on a smuggler's raft said that she and her 1-year-old son only came to the United States because of the Biden administration. She said, quote, "That gave us the opportunity to come." And the administration has signaled that it's not only okay with the record of illegal immigration, it's actively encouraging more people to make the trek. Prior to the Biden administration's border crisis, there was a clear and sensible process for migrants who crossed our border to claim asylum. That individual would be processed by the Border Patrol and undergo a credible fear assessment, which is the standard for claiming asylum, essentially determining whether, at least as a preliminary matter, whether they would qualify for asylum. If so, that person would be issued a notice to appear at a future court hearing, a critical document that tells asylum seekers when and where to show up for their day in court. But under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, that's not happening anymore. I've heard from many folks in Texas about the fact that huge numbers of migrants are now being released without a notice to appear. Thousands of migrants have been released with what's now called a notice to report, essentially a document that says when you get where you're going, turn yourself in to your local Immigration and Customs Enforcement office. Well, these migrants haven't undergone a credible fear screening, so we have no way of knowing how many of them were likely potentially qualify for asylum. We do know, based on decisions from immigration courts, that only about 10% of the people who claim asylum actually qualify under the prevailing legal standard. Because these migrants haven't undergone a preliminary screening, we have no information about the validity of their asylum claims, and it's unclear whether the administration has given any teeth at all to the warning that failure to contact the local ICE office may result in your arrest. In other words, there are no consequences for not showing up. The Department of Homeland Security is now telling us that they've stopped issuing notices to report, but the truth is they've just changed the title. They're still paroling migrants into the United States without issuing a notice to appear. And when these migrants inevitably fail to turn themselves in to the nearest ICE office, and ICE's internal figures suggest the compliance rate is unsurprisingly low, it isn't clear that the Department of Homeland Security will do anything at all to locate them and remove them from the United States, even though they haven't complied with the process that they've been told they must comply with. The Biden administration has made it even easier for migrants to disappear into the great American heartland. Several weeks ago, Secretary Mayorkas gave migrants another reason to believe that they can make it across our borders and be able to stay. According to Secretary Mayorkas, illegally entering our country is no longer a reason enough for ICE to begin removal proceedings. The Secretary's guidance provided a few exemptions. In theory, illegal border crossers are a priority for enforcement, but only if they are apprehended in the United States after unlawfully entering after November the 1st, 2020. It's unclear what the magic is with that date. But in other words, ICE agents can't touch them unless another law enforcement agency picks them up first. It says individuals convicted of serious criminal conduct who pose a current threat to public safety should be a priority for removal. But it's unclear what crimes meet those criteria. Is distributing or receiving child pornography considered serious criminal conduct? What about crimes like embezzlement, larceny, breaking and entering, sex offenses? It's unclear exactly what the standard is, and I think that's on purpose, because clearly Secretary Mayorkas does not want the Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement to actually enforce the law that Congress has written. We're the ones that make the policy, and the Border Patrol and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement simply executes that policy. But clearly, Secretary Mayorkas is trying to confuse things such that no apprehension and detention takes place at all. What if the distribution of child pornography, let's say, happened 4 years ago? Is the perpetrator no longer a priority for apprehension and removal now that the threat isn't, quote, current? In fact, the Secretary explicitly says the threat shouldn't be determined according to bright lines or categories. In other words, he wants to continue to fuzz it up and make it ambiguous. I don't understand why, if you're actually serious about enforcing our laws. Is there a reason that any migrant convicted of possessing or distributing child pornography should be allowed to remain in the United States? The Secretary indicates that even certain migrants, like those who are elderly or provide for their families, should be exempt from the law. That clearly is not within the authority of the Secretary to decide against whom the laws should be enforced. Does that mean that someone who committed a sexual assault 20 years ago but now has a family that depends on them should be able to remain in the United States? It defies all common sense to ask our law enforcement officers to turn a blind eye when they encounter individuals who've clearly broken the law. Imagine calling the police to report an intruder in your home and being told, unless this person is young, childless, and murdered a family member of your family, we can't do anything, or we won't do anything. The reality of the situation, however inconvenient it may seem for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is that entering the United States illegally, by doing that, migrants have broken the law, and there have to be consequences. The Secretary cannot consistent with his oath of office, refused to enforce those laws in order to appease his party's political base. In fact, by clearly outlining who will and who will not be able to remain in the United States, notwithstanding what the law says, the administration is actually encouraging even more migrants to put themselves in harm's way to come to the United States. This is known as pull factors that actually encourage more illegal immigration. Under this guidance, visa overstays aren't a priority for enforcement at all. If somebody comes in on a visa but overstays that visa, they are illegally present in the United States. But they don't have to worry about the Biden administration actually enforcing the law and removing them. In other words, the guidance is an open invitation for migrants to disregard the terms of their entry into the United States. When Biden's nominee for Customs and Border Protection testified before the Senate Finance Committee, I asked the police chief from Arizona if he agreed that the Biden administration's policy of non-enforcement is a pull factor encouraging more illegal immigration. He admitted that, yes, it is. So yesterday I asked Secretary Mayorkas the same question. Does this guidance of non-enforcement send a signal to criminal organizations, human smugglers, and migrants that if they illegally enter the United States and commit no other crimes, that they can stay? He said, no, that's 100% false. But I disagree with Secretary Mayorkas. He's clearly not telling the truth. There's a clear correlation between the Biden administration's reckless policies and the record level of illegal migration. Any administration, of course, has a certain amount of discretion when it comes to enforcement, but what we're seeing from Secretary Mayorkas isn't an exercise of discretion, and it's certainly not an A for effort worthy. I don't think anyone expected Secretary Mayorkas to lead the charge to secure our borders and crack down on the illegal immigration, but he's not even doing the bare minimum that his job description requires. The truth is the Biden administration has fumbled the border crisis at every turn. The president sent smoke signals about open borders before he even took office. And his administration has rolled out incentive after incentive for migrants to continue to break the law. And it's tied the hands of dedicated law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line to protect the American people. We've got a border czar who once compared ICE to the Ku Klux Klan, and a DHS secretary who gives himself an A, even though more than 1.7 million migrants have crossed the border since he took office in February. So while Secretary Mayorkas thinks he's entitled to an A for effort, there's no question that on balance, the Biden administration has earned an F for its response to the border crisis. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I would note the